We left because of the smoke, and I never really expected the fire to come like that. If we had thought that, we would have taken a whole lot more.
You can't even see Pikes Peak. You can barely see Pikes Peak.
I'm looking at a 100-foot wall of flame as far as I could see north to south, and I could feel that heat coming at us, and I'm thinking, can I get everyone out of here in time before someone dies?
This is multiple homes right here.
My neighborhood was virtually vaporized. I mean, there was no wood left standing.
I'm going to pan over to some flames still going. Hopefully you can see this. But that's still on fire 2 days after the fire swept through here.
It was like it was raining embers. Just like a rainstorm where there's so many drops coming down, that was happening, only it was red embers.
We've been married 45 years. We've retired Air Force. We've traveled all over the world. We've collected some things that are important to us. I didn't want to lose it.
Still gives me chills thinking about it. It was just, the whole mountain was pretty much on fire.
There's nothing left, absolutely nothing.
I know we saved a lot, but we lost a lot.
I noticed the plume of smoke right over where the Waldo Canyon hiking area was. And I thought, gee, I hope they get to that fast. And it was just a little plume of smoke. And didn't think anything about it. That was Saturday about 12:30.
Engine 3, who had been coming from another call, I hear them come over on dispatch and say, dispatch, have you reported a fire up on the side of the mountain? And I remember, because I'm on Highway 24, I had just gone back in service, they said that I look up, because I've been looking down, I look up and it's right in front of me. I mean, the column is coming up, it's right above Cedar Heights, and as soon as I saw it, I remember my first thought was, oh no, this is going to be bad.
I had a girlfriend call me who was a little bit east and said, Barbara, do you know there's a fire above you? And so I went outside and looked, and it was just a tiny little trail of smoke at that point. So I wasn't concerned.
Barb called, I stopped, and she said it's in Queens Canyon area. So I looked, and sure enough, here's this it was just a small column of smoke. And about the same time, here comes 2 fire engines. They pulled into the driveway to Glen Eyrie, and I thought, oh, they'll take care of that. So I rode on downtown.
I asked dispatch to send a full wildland response, which gets us engines and brush trucks coming that way. And I pulled over between 26th and 31st on Highway 24, got out, got my binoculars out, and got my maps out, started looking at it, and I could see Cedar Heights, and I could see some of the homes in Cedar Heights. And beyond the homes, I could actually see fire above the tops of the houses. Now at that point, I'm thinking it's right behind Cedar Heights and it's coming into Cedar Heights.
I don't live very far from the eventual evacuation area. So that day we saw the smoke cloud. Matter of fact, the sky turned a funny color when we were at home, and it made us go out and look to see what was going on.
I remember calling dispatch and saying we're going to need air support, which means we're going to need helicopters and airplanes coming in there. Made sure that the county was notified. I had them call our Office of Emergency Management, which is Brett Waters, and had him contact me, and when he called me, I said we need to go ahead and evacuate Cedar Heights.
I just finished the basement and just needed to put new carpet in the basement. So we were carpet shopping pretty close to the TV station where I work. And saw the plume of smoke, knew there was a fire. It was a Saturday, and I didn't think it was going to be any big deal then, but later on got called into work to go shoot the fire.
By about 2, my neighborhood was under mandatory evacuation orders on June 23rd.
On the west and north side of Cedar Heights, there's a canyon, and that's Williams Canyon. And so you have that canyon, then there's another ridge. On the other side of that ridge is Waldo Canyon. The fire was up over the top of that ridge, and it was building, and it was getting stronger. We put a couple of lookouts out. We had one up on Rampart Range Road, and then we had one on the, what would be the eastern slope of Williams Canyon, right at the edge of Cedar Heights.
We knew that it was very close, if not already on our reservoir property, and so we were trying to just get a look. We just drove up to the top of that road and had our binoculars out and we're trying to see what was going on.
Cedar Heights Road basically is a loop around the subdivision. Well, the north and western loop of that was never finished. So all that was there, so the pavement ran and stopped, and the pavement ran and stopped over here, and it was just a little dirt road that went all the way through there. With the city utilities crew, they ended up bringing up some bulldozers, and later in that afternoon and up into the evening, we started bulldozing that road and making it from a little single lane road at places widened at about 40 to 50 feet, and basically making a fire break. Probably around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, the plume just got gigantic. I mean, it looked like just a big monster, you know, just growing and getting thicker and bigger, and it got huge, and it also started twisting and moving. And so it had been moving north, well then it started moving to the northeast back toward the city. And over the tops of the trees you could see the flame lengths were probably anywhere from 80 to 120 feet above the top of the trees. So if you're looking at a 40-foot tree, that's 150 feet, you know, 200 feet up in the air.
We were taking weather, where you spin weather and you find out what is the humidity level, what's the wind speed, what direction is it. So we were doing all that to try to figure out where it might go.
And once it got dark and the weather changed, the smoke laid down and actually laid down on top of us and down into the valley toward the city. Then embers started falling out of the sky, and you could hear the roar of the fire coming up the other side of the mountain, and it started racing up the side into the top of Cedar Heights. There's only a couple places that it made it past the fire line, and we had one probably 80-foot area where we had to get crews around it and put it out. But that whole ridge was just fire about 3 in the morning. Usually at night, because of the temperatures, your temperatures go down and your humidities go up, fires tend to lay down and be slower and just kind of creep along. And then the next day they kick back up and really go to town. Well, that fire activity in the middle of the night was incredible. While we were standing there at that point, all of a sudden there was this boom, like a sonic boom. And what it was a tree exploding. And what happens sometimes is when you get so much intense heat so quickly against a tree, it'll boil the sap and just blow it up.
It was a difficult fire to fight out in the forest because there weren't very many roads, so it was sort of an inaccessible fire to get to. People had to hike long distances just to get to a place where they could start fighting the fire. There was very difficult terrain back in that area west of Colorado Springs and north of Highway 24 as you travel towards Woodland Park. It's very steep, very deep canyons, so it makes it very difficult for firefighters to directly work on the ground there.
Manitou got evacuated at one point, and some of the towns up the pass got evacuated, and then we got evacuated down toward Glen Erie initially, and then Mountain Shadows, and then Peregrine, and so it just depended on where the fire was going.
It was doing pretty much what everyone said it was going to do, and I had those 3 task forces in my branch, and I was running between those 3 divisions.
The fire had been burning north and west, and selfishly, we thought at the Colorado Springs Fire Department that's a good thing because it's burning in the forest away from the city, and there weren't what we call many values at risk sort of in the way of the fire.
That night, it was still pretty active, but it was moving more north and a little bit northeast, going toward Queens Canyon. And the one thing I remember about that night was about 3 in the morning, look at the temperature, and it was still 79, 80 degrees at 3 in the morning. And the lieutenant that I was sitting with at that point, when the sun started rising, I remember saying to him, I think this is the day that it's going to come into the city. And that was Tuesday morning.
We got the call Saturday afternoon, and we're told to pack up and get out.
I got a reverse 911 call, which is, I'd never gotten one before. So thank goodness I was home. And they said, due to the nature of the fire, we are asking that the people in certain areas of Mountain Shadows mandatorily evacuate.
We heard the evacuation for our neighbors that were not far from us. And we saw the smoke and we decided we'd pack up and head on out.
It was a voluntary evacuation at that point, so we decided to do that. We would follow directive and packed up the 3 days that they recommended, and my folks happened to be out of town, so we went to their home. And we just spent the evening there, and I remember thinking, well, this is a waste.
The fire seemed so non-threatening at that point that there wasn't any panic. People were packing their cars and driving at a sane speed out of the neighborhood and, you know, waiting to let a car get ahead. That's sort of unlike what happened on Tuesday afternoon, where people were literally fleeing for their lives.
We are on the line of Chuckwagon, and it was south of Chuckwagon, but we're right there next to the Flying W Ranch. So we decided to move to a hotel on Saturday because we had 4 cats.
We were actually in an area, the voluntary evacuation zone. We're 1 street away from the mandatory evacuation zone.
We got all the stuff that we really cared about, kids, pets, photos, etc., put them in the car and took it over to Grandma's house, and really from that point on we were out of the house. Peregrine had a little bit of a confusion of voluntary, mandatory, voluntary. They couldn't quite decide what kind of evacuation order to give us, so we just actually left that Saturday and stayed out.
My wife's little sister was staying at my parents' house because they were out of the country at the time. We were part of the first evacuation on Saturday. I think it was like 3 in the morning their time, and they're like, "Oh, Tim, it's nice to hear from you." And I was like, "Well, not so nice. I need you to put together a list of anything you might want from the house and email it to me in the next half hour because I'm driving down from Denver right now to evacuate the house."
I do remember just saying, "Don't worry about things." You know, he suggested all the china, and I said, "Don't worry about that. It's just things. You know, maybe get photos, important paperwork." We told him where our backup drives were.
Barb called and said, "We're on a notice for a pre-evacuation notice order." And I said, "You're kidding." But I looked up and you could see the smoke was dramatically different from when I left. There was a command center being set up at 31st in Colorado. So I said, shoot. So I rode down there. I thought I could see what was happening down there. And that was kind of exciting. There were lots of stuff going on, and the police cars were all gathering up to, there must have been 20 or 25 police cars, and then they all took off at once to start the evacuation notice. And I said, I called Barb and said, "Come get me. It's, you know, really hot down here. And could you come, you know, just drive down and pick me up?" She said, "No."
No, I was really afraid. I was really afraid as people were leaving, and people were leaving the neighborhood, that if I left, I wouldn't get back in.
That Saturday we were thinking, we'll probably be out for a few days, so took my truck over to my mother-in-law's house, grabbed some clothes. I mean, I left all the furniture, a laptop that had all our pictures on it, grabbed that. We really didn't take a whole lot of stuff. Guns, I had some guns, I'm a hunter.
You're cycling around and you pick something up and think, well, do I really need this? Or should I get something else? And of course, I mean, we had some time. It wasn't like we had 30 minutes to do this. But we knew we were under pressure to move out, to get out.
So I packed some stuff in a couple of LL Bean boat bags, grabbed a strong box that my late husband and I had put together after the Hayman fire with some important documents in it, grabbed my late husband's ashes and my dog. And I threw all that. I had a bunch of other stuff I was going to pick up, but I threw all that stuff in the car because I had to go to the United Way dinner. And when I went back to get the rest of the stuff, they wouldn't let me go back. So I said, okay, this is really, oh dear.
There was other fires in Colorado at that time, and we had talked about if we got evacuated, what we would take. And so we didn't have a list, but we had in our mind what we would take. And so she did exactly
I
what
went room to room and I looked and just looked around, and said, do we need this, this, and this?
It's kind of funny. You think like you're saying goodbye to everything, but then you just don't take stuff. It's a funny experience.
It wasn't a real experience to me. It was the smoke because of the asthma that was causing some difficulty. So we'd just gone up to the mountains where there was clean air for a couple days. So consequently, we had very minimal material that we took with us.
I took pillowcases and put everything in pillowcases because I didn't want to go all the way to the basement and lug up big heavy suitcases.
You know, you think of the various things and, you know, computer hard drives and external drives and, you know, photographs and photo albums and things like that, but there's so much you don't think of. There was smoke in the air, there was probably ash, so it was pretty real, but you know, to us it was like, oh, well, this is just evacuation, it's go ahead and grab these things, but you know, we didn't want to give, you know, you don't want to mention everything that you want to save because it'd be endless.
Our kitty cats, I think, sensed something was wrong. We have 2 kittens, and they hid, and we could not catch them. I didn't worry at that point, so we left a lot of food out for them and left them there. And they stayed there all the way through the fire because we couldn't get them out. So that bothered me a lot.
We had 2 cars. We had my stepdaughter's wheelchair that had to fit in one, and she has guinea pigs that we were not going to leave behind. And then you start with the you know, things that are important to you. You know, a picture here or there, or diaries, or you know, a knick-knack, or something that had some, you know, particular meaning.
I took 3 changes of summer clothes. I took some Christmas ornaments. For some reason, I said to my husband, run down and just get those. You know, I know it's silly, but, and a couple of photo albums, not everything. I lost most of the photos. We just got a couple of things, just things that were like in plain sight. We just kind of grabbed, that was it.
At about 5 o'clock, when we were ready to leave, police were knocking on our door, telling us that we needed to go.
Even with a truck and an SUV and a couple of other cars, not enough room to take all the things that you need. And you know, that's part of the dilemma over the hours and days that follow is, oh, I forgot to grab something, and oh, I need to go back. And as soon as they had cordoned off the area, that was it.
We loaded up the car all the way up. There was room for 1 dog to sit.
We took both cars.
Of course, yeah.
And the one thing we didn't take any pictures. We completely forgot pictures. So we would have had no wedding pictures. Just puts on our computer over the past few years.
At the same time, we're trying to find a place to stay. And so now, you know, you've got hundreds of families that are all evacuating and are all in the same boat, trying to figure out where they're going to go.
Michael asked me that day, Saturday, is our house going to burn? I don't know, kids just think different than adults. And I was like, there's no, but I was like, yeah, it'll be 3 days before it gets here, so you can sleep easy, you know, at least 3 days before you have to worry about anything. And the whole time I was saying, I was thinking like, yeah, there's nothing, it's never going to make it, you know, 10 miles or whatever it went to my house. But it did, so.
We got in the car and started driving down to our kids' house, and they live in the southwest part of town. And over the radio they said that was a mistake, that Mountain Shadows was really not supposed to evacuate. They were still in pre-evacuation. So we did a U-turn on 30th and came back, parked in the garage, and the TV was still saying we were on evacuation notice. And that's, the police came around again, maybe the second time, it was the first time I saw them, and they said, no, you are on evacuation notice. He said, disregard what the news is saying, the radio, you need to get out now.
And then you just squeeze it in the cars, close the doors, and drive away.
I was involved beginning the second day, which was Sunday the 24th. We were called in to conduct evacuations in the southern half of Mountain Shadows, which would have been the section of Mountain Shadows that's closer to Cedar Heights and where the fire was actually pressing down. So that day, I still recall it was almost 100 degrees where we were. It was really hot and really dry, and we had to come in full uniform.
We weren't, ordering people to leave at that point, but the vast majority of people had already left.
They lifted that voluntary evacuation status, and we just went home. So the odd part of that was now we're living at home out of a suitcase.
They let me walk in with the dog and got a couple more things, not much, because we didn't think it would have watered some plants. We didn't really think anything would happen.
We kept going back to the house every day for lunch and hanging out there, but we just stayed in the hotel because we had the 4 cats, and they were one of the only places that would take the cats.
Since it was a voluntary evacuation where we were at, we were living in there till Tuesday.
Our job at that point was to make sure and take names and the numbers of people who were going to be in the house. What's your name? How many people are here? We're not ordering you to leave at this point, but we need to know who's in the neighborhood.
They always said it was west and it was moving west, and we just weren't really that afraid of it.
Tuesday morning on the 26th, the day the house burned down that night, they actually did a reverse 911 and said, you can go back, just don't spend the night. So I said, okay. So I took the dog and we drove back home, and people laugh. I watered all the plants. I cleaned up the kitchen. I ironed 24 linen napkins and put them away, and did 3 loads of laundry. My mother is almost 90, and she's a little short southern lady who lives back in Kentucky. And she called. She knew I was back in the house, so she called and she said, darling, put the stolen silver in your car now. And I said, yes, ma'am. About 1:30 or 2:30, I can't remember which, got another reverse 911 call saying that the nature of the fire had changed, and they were asking everyone to leave immediately. And I really didn't throw much else in the car. I picked up a couple of boxes of slides that were in the garage, and I actually lost 2 houses in the fire. We had inherited my late father-in-law's house, and his house plans were sitting there in the garage, so I threw them in the car.
I came onto the fire the 4th day thinking, this is the day. Like, we got this thing. We got that 5% contained. We kind of know where it's jumping around down there. We're gonna get on top. I was just sure that Tuesday was the day we were gonna get on top of it. I literally was driving in thinking that.
We were planning for hot, dry weather, extreme weather conditions, which then is going to create extreme fire behavior. What changes with that plan is just the unknown with the fire behavior, and you react to that as that occurs.
The briefing in the morning was pretty scary. There's a 6 o'clock a.m. briefing, and they briefed our chief and said that it was exactly the same conditions at the Hayman fire.
It really just looked like a normal day. There was no smoky haze. The wind was actually blowing the smoke away from our neighborhood. And it was funny because we were all out watering our plants and getting everything tidied up, and some people were loading up lots of stuff, but I just didn't really think, no, they'll never let that fire come over this hill.
I started seeing the conditions really change roughly about the 1 to 2 o'clock. And that's when I was coming over the hill and decided to go straight down to Station 4 where I work. Grabbed all my gear. I noticed that we didn't have any trucks there at the time. So we had just a utility truck. And I started loading up the utility truck and calling my wildland team members back into work so that we would be ready should something occur.
One of the reports that I'd heard early that afternoon was that the fire had come across Queens Canyon, which was an area that we hoped it wouldn't do, just because there was no good area to stop the fire from progressing to the north and to the east towards the city.
I think it kind of hit me when I was driving into work and saw, it crested the mountain. It's like, wow, this is getting really close to home now. So I ran back to try to get some more stuff out of the house, and I guess it did hit me like, oh, there's a really good chance now it can be gone, in a few days.
My son actually went back to get a watch that his deceased grandfather had given him. He had forgotten when we had moved out on Saturday. And none of us believed that any of this was going to happen, so we took nothing. And he just said, you know, if something happens, I want to have that. So they went back up at about 4 o'clock that afternoon of the fire, and they saw it coming over the mountain and down the hill.
I happened to wake up at 4 when they're doing their briefing and the mayor was speaking. And I remember seeing somebody go over and talk to the mayor and whisper in his ear, and then he said, it's a mandatory evacuation, and I'm laying there in bed going, oh, that's not good. And I got up and I went out to the house and I looked out the front. My wife was standing out there with a couple neighbors and they were looking toward the mountain. Well, I came out there and I could tell it was getting ready to blow up. The winds hit us and you can feel the heat. The ash was falling on us. The smoke came across us and laid down in the valley below us. You could only see the tops of houses. And we're 7 miles away. And as I was watching that, I remember looking over at my wife and going, I gotta go back in.
Really what happened, we had a thunderstorm probably 10 to 12 miles west of our location. When that thunderstorm collapsed, that pressure wave collapsed our column that we had working.
Here comes this thunderstorm over here, and it moves and actually collides with that column and just lays it down. And that's like taking a flamethrower and just laying it down.
And then the chatter on the radio just goes, it just blows up. You know, I had 2 radios on, I couldn't listen to them fast enough.
We had 5 to 10 mile an hour winds that went to 65 miles an hour, and it took that lazy moving fire and basically made it an inferno.
Mountain shadows happened to be right in the middle of those 2 canyons, and it just blew down. And I mean, there wasn't any stopping that.
I had heard crews engaging. I'd heard mention that there was significant fire coming through an area, that they were pulling out, going to safety zones, that type of conversation. That is a red flag for a safety officer.
I could have had 1,000 engine companies sitting behind me and all the water in the world, and I couldn't have put that fire out the way it was coming at us. So we called for a retreat to Chipeta Elementary School, and I thank God every day that I did that, because I think I would have lost people up there if we wouldn't have pulled out when we did.
We drove all in a row with lights. Anyone who had lights and siren had them on, and the ones who didn't stayed in between the cars that did. And the interstate was packed with people, so we couldn't drive in the lanes. We drove in the inside breakdown lane.
When I was leaving the Wilson water tank, when I called for the first retreat, my last memory, my last vision, when I turned around, was I had a 100-foot wall of flame as far as I could see north to south with 65 mile an hour wind, and I could feel the heat. And that's why I retreated, because there's just no way I was gonna, you can't fight nature. You can't beat it.
We can see the flames all along the tops of the hills, and we can see them breaking over the hilltops and coming down towards Centennial. There were some clouds that we drove through where you couldn't even see. You know, we all had our lights on, of course, but it was the word that's been used so many times is surreal. It just didn't even seem real at the time.
We couldn't see the hood of the vehicle that we were in. So when we were in a line of vehicles, so we got on the radio and said, let's all just keep going at about 20 miles an hour. The lead vehicle, try to keep the next person in sight, but we need to make it to this location.
At 4 o'clock, I turned on the news conference because, you know, we had been living by that 8 o'clock, 4 o'clock time schedule. And it came on, and it still said that we were in pre-evacuation, so I'm sitting there listening. And my son walks in the door, and he says, Mom, he says, there's 3 trees on the ridge across the street from us on fire. And I said, what? I said, we're still in pre-evacuation. And he says, and he laughs, and he says, come see.
Got home at 4 o'clock and had turned on the television to see what the progress was, and then I noticed along the ticker tape at the bottom that all of Mountain Shadows was under mandatory evacuation. And Trish arrived there shortly after.
About 4:15.
And by then we were loading things up and
literally throwing things into the car. Because when I drove out the cul-de-sac, what he couldn't see because he was already home was the roiling mass of orange cloud that was almost directly behind our house. And by what we've been told after the fact, maybe 20 to 30 minutes before the house was gone, or I should say engulfed, which is a little too close for comfort.
The smoke was so thick and high and bright orange from the flames that it was just, like I said, surreal. As the smoke advanced our way, right as we were moving into the neighborhoods, it seemed to fall on top of us. Suddenly we couldn't even see anything. We could barely even hear each other. The wind was so loud, the smoke was so thick.
When we drove into Mountain Shadows, word from dispatch and incident command was that they were leaving. The fire department's gone. The fire department's leaving, Forest Service is leaving. The only people going in at that point were law enforcement.
We gave each two-person team the assignment to clear a given area before they moved to the next area. And what they would do is go house to house, literally on foot, not driving up and down the street giving an announcement, but knocking on every door. We had to note every house where they refused to leave, and we just didn't want to miss a single door. So we were very thorough and methodical in how we did it. They checked in with us as they cleared each street so that we could keep track and know that we weren't missing anyone.
Our grandson was in the house, and we watched the conferences. We got stuck on streaming video, and we picked up the phone. I think you got a hold of him, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And started yelling at the oldest daughter to run, get up there, and get her uniforms. And her husband got up there, she got up there, and they grabbed a few things and left. I mean, everybody's yelling at everybody, get out, get out, get out.
I have this, it's like a backpack that I keep with me, and it lets me broadcast a live signal back to TV station. So I started doing that right from the middle of my cul-de-sac and called back to our producers, and I was like, take a look at my feed, and they were all like, holy crap, we're gonna be taking your picture a lot. So they started rolling on the stuff from the inside the fire. And probably not even 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, a police car drove through with a bullhorn, yelling at everybody, get out now, fire is imminent, coming down the hill, leave now, and all my neighbors are scrambling.
Most people were kind of in a panic, not complete panic where they were out of control, but they were scared, very scared, looking to somebody for guidance. I think it snuck up on a lot of people, the severity of it. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh my God, we got to get out of here, and we don't have everything together. We were literally running inside houses and grabbing suitcases, grabbing dogs, pets, bringing them out to their cars, actually arranging with other neighbors to give people rides out of there. It was pretty frantic for a while.
At some point, a police officer raced up into our driveway, and he ran in the house because we had the door open as we were shuttling stuff out. And he ran in the house and he just shouted, get out, get out, get out.
We grabbed, important papers, clothes for 3 days. I don't know what I was thinking, but I packed work clothes. And just got everything thinking for 3 days. And off we went, and the last time we looked back at the house, it was worrisome.
In the amount of time when the guys got home, which was probably 4:05, 4:10, to when 4:30 when we left, the fire had now come down the ridge and was in the valley where the Flying W Ranch was.
The one piece of advice I had for my guys, because none of us has been through this before, was to give yourself an escape route. Make sure when you go into a cut-off area, an area without an outlet, cul-de-sacs, make sure you position your car where you'll probably be able to get out. The plan was be quick, watch each other's back, and don't leave anybody behind.
It looked like burning oil coming down the hillside, just in undulating waves of burn coming down the hillside. And you couldn't really see my neighborhood, but the helicopters were over there, and they were dropping water, and I looked at my friends and I said, that is not a good sign.
Knowing that that's coming our way, you kind of had to accept that this may not end all that great. We're not about giving up. We never give up. But the reality of it was this is way bigger than us.
So I go up and I pound on the door, And through the glass window that was just right next to the front door, I could see into this guy's living room. He's sitting on his couch. And I pound on the door. He walks up to the door, opens up the door, and he just sort of looks at me and says, "Is everything okay? Is everything okay, officer?" And I said, "Well, no, everything's not okay. Are you aware that your house is under a mandatory evacuation?" And he said, "Oh, well, you know, we knew about the fire, but we didn't know this was we were living in a mandatory evacuation area." And I said, "Well, yeah, you're here. And if you took one step back from his front porch and looked up, you could see this charred, almost deep black smoke just billowing a couple hundred feet over his house. And the fire was a few hundred feet away. And you take one more step back and look down the street, and the fire was actually coming up the street towards his house. And I kind of took a step back and I gestured, down the street. I was stunned to the point where I didn't quite know what to say other than, there's a fire and you're under a mandatory evacuation. And he sort of steps out of his front door and he looks down the street where I gestured to the fire. And then he gets this look of almost sheer panic. And he steps back and he looks at me and he yells. And I won't yell right now, but he yells and he says, "The fire is right there." And I said, "I know."
Right after the mayor said, "Everyone get out," my husband called me and said, "I'm at the house." And then he gave me a play-by-play on the phone of the fire jumping from tree to tree down the mountainside. And he just said, "Our house is in big trouble." And he said there was only one fire truck in front of our house. And he said the young firefighters stood there just dismayed, like they just didn't even know what they were going to do. I mean, this was just beyond their capabilities, I think, completely beyond. It was just flying into the back of our house.
There was one community where it was gated. It's an electric gate, and the electricity was turned off, and so they couldn't get out of the area. So we had to break the gate open so that they could drive out of the area. There were garage doors that wouldn't open, so we had to break those open. Things like that. You're so full of adrenaline, it didn't even seem difficult to do these things.
Our son-in-law thinks that the house probably was hit not long after they left. They were pretty late leaving.
It was minutes. It was like now.
And I called Leanne, the oldest daughter, his oldest daughter, and I yelled. She was just coming off the road at Woodman. She said, "They won't let me in." I said, "You're an officer, bully your way up there and make sure you get everybody out." And she did. She got out. And she said the police were already there. They had minutes.
All the propane tanks in the area were blowing up. And so it sounded like bombs in the area. When they'd get hot enough, they'd just blow. And car tires were blowing up. A few times it seemed like the fire managed to get around behind us. And when we would turn to go back down from the end of the street, you couldn't see for sure where the flames were coming from. All you were doing is just going into the smoke. I was hoping that, fire hadn't cut off our escape yet.
Our job was to stay in there until we were certain everybody was gone, everybody had been evacuated. We never got an order to evacuate based on fear that we were going to be overrun. There were a couple of times that we thought we were getting surrounded. There were, by the fire. There were a few times when I was driving around where the smoke got so thick around me and around my vehicle that it was kind of difficult to get your bearings and figure out, where you were.
In talking with everyone, a lot of the guys weren't sure they were going to survive the situation, which made me all the more proud because nobody quit. Nobody quit, nobody ever complained.
The phone system just cratered. We were lucky we got to talk to them as long as we did. And when we knew they were leaving the house and they were on their way out of the neighborhood, I think it's the last we talked to them for a while.
Leaving the house that day with what we could fit into 2 SUVs, my car being full of dogs, his car being full of anything else that we could manage to throw in there in the 15 or 20 minutes we had, was heartbreaking.
We evacuated about 30,000 people and nobody was injured. No accidents. People really kept it together once they were leaving, because if you know the area, those streets aren't huge. And Woodman Road was the main artery going out of there, and traffic was backed up, and the fire was actually advancing on the line of cars. People were really getting scared. They were flagging officers over and saying, you know, what's happening here? What are we going to do? And we were able to get all the lanes open so all traffic could flow in one direction, no matter what the lane was.
People were stopping and letting you in, and it was frightening because embers were hitting my car. And it was so smoky that on the corner of Centennial and Vindicator, you could barely see the Walgreens there.
Literally the scariest thing I've ever been through, because then you hit the panic of everybody trying to leave that suburb at once. And the lights weren't being respected. There were policemen who were directing traffic and trying to do their best, and it was borderline panic, although everybody was still very well behaved in that they responded to the police as they should have. They respected other people, but it was very scary.
And I remember at the gas station there at the Loaf and Jug at Garden of the Gods and 30th, it was packed. There were so many people at the gas station, at the empty lot around it. And I drove past and I thought, this is like entertainment for you guys. And I've just lost my house.
Once this hit the city, it really wasn't a wildland fire anymore. We call it an urban conflagration. It wasn't so much the wildland considerations that we had to worry about, because it was 347 homes that burnt to the ground. So it wasn't the bushes and the trees and everything else. That's what brought it to us. But once it hit the city, it was an urban conflagration, and we had all different types of considerations to worry about at that time.
It just funneled the fire right to the city at 45 to 65 miles an hour. So that, coupled in with the construction of the homes, so they had shake shingles, wood siding, wood decks, just the proximity to vegetation, all of that coupled into all of these homes igniting almost at once.
There's no fire department in the world that's going to stop it. So as our crews went back in, and once the fire hit and had its big impact, we were able to go back in and stop further progression.
We were listening to and monitoring a lot of the traffic that was going on at that point, and determined that we'd be better utilized there. And so we just came in on our own. We came up Vindicator and saw pretty much where the highest concentration of flames were. I think my mentality's always been, go to the sound of the guns. Same thing with the fire department. You go to where the fire's the most intense.
We saw homes that were perfectly fine, and then homes right next to it that were just gone. Like not even a foundation. It was just gone. And smoldering. So it was just, you went from nothing to raging on fire to nothing left to the house was fine. So the cul-de-sac we were in, there ended up being 22 homes, I think, and 4 were burned to the ground, and they were already burning by the time we drove in.
They didn't have a strike team leader at this point, and that's something that I've trained for. And I was able to quickly come up and find out who was in charge of certain engines, formulate a plan. At this time I had a division soup above me who showed up and gave me a strategic goal that we had to basically hold some key houses on Ashton Court, and we built a box is what we do. Part of the box was Ashton Court, the other part of it was Flying W Ranch Road. So we couldn't let it go beyond that road.
What I was doing at that time was I was changing hats completely. I'm no longer a safety officer. Now I'm taking over as the division supervisor, looking at structure protection and containment of an urban conflagration. Something that, well, all but a couple of us on the Colorado Springs Fire Department have never seen before.
My main concern initially upon getting there and seeing the crews kind of in disarray was to get accountability of the crews, get them on a singular focused mission, and ensure their safety.
We actually progressively worked through the area and addressing fires as we came to it. So as there were fences on fires, we tried to knock down the fences, put that out. Hillsides on fire, so your shrub was burning, headed up towards other houses. So we would try to put that out before it could get to the houses.
I remember being so frustrated because they were trying to put crews together and get the wildland guys that had been called back in on Tuesday to get them on apparatus, and wanting so desperately to go and do what we're trained to do, and yet watching the dangers that we were going to be faced with.
We put an all call out to other areas in the state because we needed more help.
We had Aurora, Denver, Lakewood, everything around here, Air Force Academy, Cheyenne Mountain, Peterson Air Force Base. There was it'd be easier and a much shorter list to say who we didn't have come in that evening, which was wonderful. Without them, we would have lost many more homes.
When the battalion chief asked us to go in to this neighborhood, he said, I want you to do triage. I want you to take 30 seconds to look at the house and decide whether you can make a difference or not. And if you cannot make a difference, then go to the next house.
You don't want to say you're going to write off houses, because that's just absolutely opposed to anything that a firefighter ever does. It's what we don't do. But there comes a point where you know that if you write off this house, you can save maybe 3 houses. And then unfortunately there's times where it's like, there's 4 houses burning, I can save 1.
You know, we saw some houses that were sitting on top of a berm or on a ridge, and of course that's where all the heat is going to go, and so that the house that was at the tip of that ridge was, you know, gonna go. I certainly think the construction of the homes, whether they had shingles, wood, basically firewood on the roofs of their homes, those were going to be more vulnerable. Landscaping, you know, we saw several homes that had rock around their foundations. Those we knew we could drive by and they were going to be okay, but the house next door had all dried up bark that was decorative, but was allowed to, the embers were allowed to sit in there and catch fire. So, and some of those, it was all of those things. It didn't matter if they were stucco and had tile roofs. If an ember flew into their attic space, it burned, you know, from the inside out.
We have 10, 15, 16 houses on fire. We've got to make that stop to get the last house that burns. And then we can, you know, once we get 2 or 3 houses that are on fire to burn down enough, now I don't have to worry about this one anymore because the radiant heat isn't big enough to get this one going, then I can put my efforts elsewhere.
The house that's already in the burned area, it's already burned through, and I can save it, I will, but I won't save it at the expense of a house on a fire front, that if I don't knock that house out, it hits the next house and the next house. So you got to stop you've got to make that line in the sand and find out where that demarcation is, and you put your greatest resources there.
You're wetting down the houses that could catch fire, and you're trying to throw some water on the houses that are already burning. Again, not that we're going to save that house, but to drop the heat levels, drop those temperatures so the other houses had a chance to survive.
There would be a house that was burned into the ground, like you said, and the one next door would have just minor damage. Well, that was because that was where we decided to stop it.
We just had our hoses literally just still on the side of the house that was next to the one burning. And then, you know, it was coming up the hill behind some of the homes, so we did go behind there with our tools and we put those fires out.
I looked at the officer and we said, that house is burning, that one's burning, that one's smoking, do not let it burn down. We're drawing the line in the sand right here. The heat was so intense, there was actually a cul-de-sac there, we couldn't put the engine inside the cul-de-sac because there was too much heat. So we pulled additional lines off of the engine, set up what's called a baby deluge inside that cul-de-sac. Typically with a wildland fire, you don't hook up to hydrants. If you hook to a hydrant, it's just long enough to fill your truck and move on. But this was a position where we were in the midst of, again, the structure-to-structure conflagration. I was looking at structure fires, structure conflagration. So we had to have that hydrant and that amount of water coming into the engine in order to make the attack that we did.
I turned on everybody's garden hose that I could, and I put out spring sets with it. Honestly, for me, it's a lot lighter than a fire hose. The embers would fall as fast as you could put them out. So it was like this futile attempt to try to get them all out. They just kept falling.
Chunks as big as the palm of your hand flying through the air that were either on fire or smoldering, you know, with that red glow to them.
Imagine just everywhere you see is a firebrand, which is like a cigarette, and it's landing all over these neighborhoods and these houses. And the way it works, when you have that much intense wind pushing on it, it's like blowing on a fire to stoke it. And it will burn a hole into a house if it sits there and absolutely ignite the house from the inside out, and you wouldn't even know it until it's too late. There was one house that it was the stand, is what I call it. It was the one house that was, if this one goes, we've lost a block. And the inside was burning, the attic was burning, and we forced the doors, broke into the house, knocked down the ceiling, and did interior firefighting, which...
If a fence is burning next to a house and it's attached to the house, or the deck, for example, that happened on several, where the deck was burning, so it's not into the house. If we can quickly knock down the fence or put out that fire on the deck, and I mean, when I say knock down, I mean tear it down. The same thing with the deck. Taking axes, chainsaws, whatever we can to cut that burning part out, to throw it away from the structure, then we've protected that.
If the fire's coming and we don't have a lot of time, we'll give them 90 seconds to do it. You know, if the fire is not like right there, then we have more time to do it. But in the 90 seconds, the crews will hit a house, they'll go around, like they'll go to the back deck. If there's a propane tank on it, they'll take the propane tank off. If there's gas cans, they'll move the gas cans. They'll move them to the front of the house where there's pavement. They'll take all the lawn furniture and they'll throw it off the decks.
Sometimes we'll wet down some of the ground area, turn on lawn sprinklers. If the fire front's getting close, we'll let the lawn sprinklers help extinguish the grass fire that's approaching.
You think the houses are burnt down, so we're really not worried about that. But the thing you have to realize is we still had pretty high winds all the way throughout that night. So all the fire that's burning, they're still kicking up these firebrands, catching into the wind and blowing into other areas. So that's one of the things that was critical. We had to watch for the flying brands, we had to have individuals watching for roofs, but we still had to put water basically in these foundations to knock down all the potential for creating more fires elsewhere.
In a typical wildland scenario, you cut down trees because trees are fuel, and fuel fuels the fire and feeds the fire. But it became really apparent that, you know, I was looking at healthy deciduous trees and healthy conifers that weren't drought stressed because they're in a neighborhood. They're being watered with the lawn every day. And I noticed that the firebrands were being caught by these trees. So I used the trees as I had my crews stop cutting down trees. I gave an order from my area not to cut down any more trees, and actually just hose them down with the water that we had available and just keep them wet. Still fight the fires on the houses, but keep the trees wet, because that would keep the embers from going across the road and losing our box and losing control over the area that we had. We started doing that, and we started getting a hold of it.
Right at the end of Courtney Drive, there was 2 homes that survived down there. Well, one of those had a big, I don't know, probably 30-foot, even taller than that, pine tree that was right up close to the house that was catching fire. As one of our guys is cutting it down with a saw, he tips it away from the house, and that house didn't burn. Another one of our guys went into that house, pulled ceiling, and knocked down some fire that was in the attic. So it was that close to burning, but that house survived.
One of those crews called me up and said, hey, we've got a roof fire. We've got a fire running the roof. So I went over and looked at that, and sure enough, flames right in the middle of it. And we're assigning getting some water, some hoses in place to put that out. 2 to 3 seconds later, fire pops up just to the right, same roof. And then about another 3 seconds, it pops up to the left. And that's when I identified that we didn't have a roof fire, we had an attic fire. On that one, we had to use some different tactics and get some people that were in structure gear, some were not, and actually went interior, pulled ceiling, was able to put water on that fire very quick. So that house we were able to save.
Around midnight, they started bringing some of the crews into staging that had been fighting the main body of fire. And it was so hard for me to see them come in. It looked like they had really just been through war, a battle, you know, completely faces covered with soot, Their shirts, nothing yellow remained of their shirts. They were all covered in black, and you could just tell they were just emotionally and physically wrought and just done. And I think that was so hard because I knew, although it's a good-sized apartment, we know everyone. And a matter of fact, because of the way the recall happened, I wasn't with my normal crew. A lot of my guys that I normally work with were in different places in that fire, some in Cedar Heights, others actually fighting fire, and so I was worried about them. And you're seeing these crews come in, and I remember thinking that it wasn't going to be good, and in fact that we probably had lost firefighters and they weren't going to tell us until later.
I remember getting off at like 1:30 in the morning that morning and stopping at a stop sign just bawling, you know, just like it sort of hit me at that point that the whole city was, because it wasn't out by then. And I was afraid it was never going to be out. I saw so much burning houses that I just didn't know if we'd ever, I remember saying, I don't think we're ever going to get these all out.
From that Saturday on, we pretty much had the television on fire news consistently.
That day they were like, we're just going to go on till this fire's out. So we pretty much have somebody around the clock. And I told them, like, keep an eye on this thing, call me, you know, no matter what, in the middle of the night if it, like, even though I knew it was way far away, I was kind of thinking, you know, I need somebody to keep an eye on it.
We had the TV in the hotel running like 24 hours, just anything that came on at all, we were glued to the set watching it.
We were watching the 4 o'clock news conference, and we're looking out the window with our binoculars watching the fire.
It was like watching the, you know, the most dramatic, exciting, scary, emotionally combined event you've ever seen on a TV show or on a movie. And regardless of what was going on, whether it was something at work or, you know, something with one of the kids, you just literally couldn't pull yourself away.
We had a good vantage point at 21st and Lower Gold Camp. We had a sight line that was just right on Mountain Shadows in the background. So I was there watching with maybe 30 or so other people when that fire rolled down the mountain. And we saw it, and I remember there's some ladies next to me, they started crying. They were familiar with Mountain Shadows. And I turned and said, I think Mountain Shadows is gone. It looked that serious.
I watched it live on TV. On an internet feed and watched it come closer. I had been keeping track of it in the days since it started and hadn't been too worried about the house, and then all of a sudden on Tuesday it had just gotten right there, and it was weird to be so far away.
We watched every single conference. We watched that fire. Every time they said there was going to be any kind of news, we were on those. We were watching on iPads because we didn't take the computer.
You couldn't take your eyes off TV. You had to watch it. And when I realized what was burning, I knew that was our neighborhood. When they said the Flying W had burned up, I said, well, we're gone. There's probably, I knew in my heart that it was gone.
We might have did a service to a lot of people though. I had a few people next day like, thanks, you know, if I wasn't sitting in my house and like see it on TV, because you can't really see over the hill until the fire crested the hill, and then everybody could see and smell it. I mean, the sky would turn orange. It was just, that was one crazy day.
You ask how we felt during the first couple of days we were in the mountains.
Shock.
And it was shock, but you know it's a type 3 problem. It's going to happen. There isn't a thing we can do, so you just wait it out.
Yeah.
The fire in the mountainside was still burning. So as it continued up north to Peregrine and up towards Air Force Academy, we were still highly concerned with areas up there.
There's an area, if you go up Centennial to where it turns into Woodman Valley, and it's called Blodgett Peak, and there's a little park there, and then there's a subdivision there, and the road is actually Blodgett Road, and it does a loop. Well, that subdivision there ended up being our focus.
We had a little bit of time to set up our game plan. You know, if we didn't, it was going to be the same scenario that we had down in Mountain Shadows. Exact same scenario.
About 3 in the afternoon on Wednesday, we had a similar thunderstorm event. It got very windy, but no rain with those thunderstorms, just wind and lightning. and it pushed the fire into Colorado Springs city limits around the Blodgett Peak area.
The crews that were in there, they're watching the fire. In fact, one of the drivers off of Engine 8, he's one of the guys that was with the Denver crew. He's standing there watching, and he said 200 feet, 150 feet, 50 feet, go. And it was about that fast. And they just cleared out of there and got to a safe area, or even some of them hid behind their pumpers in the middle of the street, and that fire blew through there. And it was probably a good 80 miles an hour. And then once it blew through, we put everybody back in, and they started going to work.
I'd never seen fireballs. Have you ever seen Lord of the Rings? And when they're on, what was that, Mount Doom? And I'd never seen a flame front just march the way it was, and fireballs just emit from the flame front.
It was just like being in a blast furnace, and yet I couldn't see, almost my hand across my face. Just bent down all this smoke and debris. And I remember big chunks of had to be paint or siding that were floating in the air and then landing. And I had some that landed down my collar. And you're just like, good grief! It was like raining.
There's fire everywhere. I mean, on top of houses, like decks on fire, little trees on fire, grass on fire, spot fires everywhere. And initially we thought, I had reports from 2 different officers that, this house, it's a loser, it's going to go up, there's no way we can save it. And there's 2 houses that they identified we had to just let burn.
Told them I needed additional engines. And they asked how many. I said, how many do you have? They said, we have 8. I said, I need them all.
The very peak of this ridge is just a road with houses on both sides and straight down hillside. Well, there's fire coming up both sides of that ridge.
We've just watched hundreds of houses burn. I gotta say I was ticked off. I'm thinking the fire's gonna race down the mountain. I'm gonna put this engine here, they're gonna get cooked. I know they are, but they're a good crew. Or I take that same crew, if the fire doesn't go that way, it's gonna come over to this intersection where there's one key house. So which one do I?
They took a section of hose and they put it on each hydrant in this area. Pre-planning so that when the fire did blow through there, we could go grab that hydrant really quick.
By now I've got a well-oiled machine, and I'm looking at this crew and I go, okay, at a moment's notice I'm going to come down here and tell you to move here, and you're going to tie into this hydrant, and you're going to have to stand your ground. And I just trust me. If you do what I say, you're going to be safe, and it's going to work, and we're going to steer this fire. We're not going to stop it, but we can steer the fire.
They'd take that hose that we already had hooked up, put into their engine. All 3 of the 4 crew members would jump off with hoses, go to houses on both sides of the street, knock down all the fire that they could see, and then they would undo that hose and they'd run up to the next hydrant, pour off, do the same thing. I would say probably in that area there, we'd probably saved 40 to 50 homes. And even the 2 homes that we thought we were going to lose, once we got the fire knocked down on the ones and freed up some resources, then we put those resources onto those 2 homes, and they didn't lose those either.
They're not expert firefighters as far as wildland fire, so they're trusting you in your decisions. And I'm sitting there truly hoping that I made the right decision, and hoping that I was right in my assessment. And I just remember sitting there, the guy's on a deck gun, just getting cooked and beat up. And he stood his ground and steered the fire. So, pretty humbling.
This is real typical with wildland fires like that, is the wind blew a spot fire down into the valley between basically Woodman Road, Blodgett area in that subdivision, and Mount St. Francis, the convent. And so there's a fire that was growing in the grasses down there. So we took one of our task forces and sent it down there, and that's what they did, is they worked on that fire and put it out, which if the fire had got going down there, it could have gone right through Woodman Valley all the way down to Woodman Valley Church and I-25.
After that Tuesday and Wednesday, a lot of the fire activity subsided. The fire had burned out a lot of the fuel that it had in those areas.
That big scar above Mountain Shadows, or Orchard Valley there, that helped us a lot, because if that scar had not been there, all that fire activity that you saw come through Mountain Shadows probably would have come through the Orchard Valley area too, and we would have lost hundreds of more homes.
We had guys that weren't even out of the fire academy. They're being thrust into a truly a bad scenario. And so these are brand new people. They have no fire experience, and their first fire is Waldo Canyon. They get yanked out of a classroom, given gear and said, stick with this guy. That's not the norm. But that's, you adapt and overcome. When people say, well, there's no way they should have done that, and there's no way to put them in that scenario. My grandfather was a fighter pilot at 21 years old in World War II. You rise to the occasion, and these people did.
It looked like something you see in a movie where, bombs and fires just took out whole areas. It was very sad, very depressing. Just all the houses were still smoking, and there were still small flames, and pipes were burst, and there's water spraying everywhere. And it was eerie because there were no people. The only people were cops and firefighters cruising around the area.
We walked around and marked all the houses and did a search of all the houses. We also had to do what we call a primary search of all those houses to verify that we didn't have any other casualties in those houses. So I started off with that, and then Thursday afternoon, evening into Friday, it was my job to recover the 2 bodies that were actually discovered and the 2 people that were lost in the fire.
The official notice came at that Thursday night meeting at UCCS. Now there'd been some satellite imagery available on the internet that some of our neighbors, they were convinced when they saw the pictures. It wasn't quite as clear to us, maybe because we were hoping for a different outcome. The mayor spoke, and Scott Henty spoke, and a few other officials, and so then we were told, okay, the first 150 people in the back of the room go to room X, and then the next. So one lady who happened to be one of our neighbors spoke up and said, wait a minute, I don't want to be with 150 strangers. I want to be with It wasn't doable. They couldn't manage to do what they intended to do.
We saw photos from the Denver Post online.
The very next morning I knew my house burned to the ground. I know a few firefighters and police officers, and one of the firefighters was like, I'm at your house. And they wouldn't say if the house burned or not. I was just like, take a picture, I gotta see what it looks like. Didn't hear back for a while. It's actually through my brother that knows this firefighter. My brother's like, he doesn't want to send you the pic. Finally, I want to say like an hour later, my brother emailed me the picture, and all I recognized was his driveway.
We had a neighbor that's a couple houses down that works for Channel 11.
He sent us
the picture,
and it was a picture that was half our remaining home and half the house next to us, but we could certainly determine that was our chimney, and that was the only thing left standing at the time. We couldn't see any further right from that, but we could look at that and say, yeah, it's gone.
My brother called, and he says, Chris, I'm looking at aerial footage on the news, and he says, I'm looking at your house. And I said, are you sure?
We saw the thermal image on Wednesday morning that was on TV, and we saw our house. We found it on the internet. We saw our house was down we knew by Wednesday when they posted the photographs. So we knew early. We didn't have to wait for confirmation. It's pretty obvious. The house next door was up. Our house looked like a ghost. There were a couple of part of the front wall was still up. So we knew.
The most official was when they released the list of the streets that had affected homes, and our street wasn't on there.
Our son-in-law is a police officer, and he was stationed up there to patrol the area, and he called us and said the house was fine.
It was still standing.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that.
Tim was feeling kind of relief. He had heard from a friend. They thought it was just the ridge above us, and he had written, no, maybe it's not. The house isn't gone, but then wrote back, I don't know how many hours later, it's kind of a blur now, but it was definitely gone.
Everybody says, how did you feel when you kind of realized that? And I said, you know, it is what it is. There's nothing I can do to change it. Yeah, it would have been nice to have gotten some more stuff out, but that fire was moving fast and it was very, very hot. And I am just very, very grateful that no firefighter was hurt or killed and that my neighbors all got out.
They handed everybody a stack of pages stapled together with addresses, and then next to the address it says, in our case and in 346 other cases, it just said destroyed. And that was the official word.
And it was a little heated in that meeting too. It wasn't open to the public, it was just for homeowners. And we all knew why we were there. It's like, you probably wouldn't have called us here if our house wasn't on the list. And people were kind of being testing, like, just give us a list now. We just want to know. That's the only reason we showed up. Is my house there or not? And it's a yes, no question. And, you know, if I didn't have a firefighter buddy that was right there standing at my driveway, you know, I would have had to wait a few more days like those other people had to wait for the city to make it official. And, you know, it was kind of maybe a weird relief in a way. Just, it's like, all right, now that question's asked, now what do I do? Now I can make the next decision.
For us, it was not a big step out of our norm to say, okay, there's nothing behind us. There's only one direction to go, and that's forward. Let's do it now.
You had to check in there so they knew, you know, what address, what people were going to what address. But that was it. And then there was I expected that there was going to be okay, you got 30 minutes and that's it. And there was no time constraint at all.
The first area you really saw was Courtney and Ashton Park in that part, and that was an area that got hit hard where most of the houses were gone, and so it was just surreal.
Our house is the only one on our particular cul-de-sac that burned down, and so like the neighbors' houses are fine, and it's strange.
Every house on Yankton was gone. There's probably a dozen homes on our cul-de-sac and they were all burned. So nothing left, not even, I mean, there's a few cars that were in garages that were just kind of melted, chunks of metal in their garage where the garages were.
The wall that we had seen that was up, part of it was down by then.
But it wasn't in pieces, it was all burned even then.
And the archway, the big archway to the front of our house was still standing.
You'd see 4 or 5 houses, and then one would be burned down, and then another stretch of 8. Or you'd come across a stretch where 4 were burned down, and then there was 1 standing, and then 3 are gone. And so it just seemed so random.
Especially Parkside, which is the HOA that 80% burned. It looked like World War II. Pictures that you see of World War II was just devastated, and little fires and smoke. And
my husband and my son went up there when they were allowed to go the first time. My daughter and I couldn't go. We decided we were never going to go look at it because we just didn't want to see it in that condition. And they said, my husband and son said they wanted the closure.
The firemen have used the term that the house is in the foundation. And that's literally where the house is. It's in the foundation.
There's nothing left, you know, unless you want some burned metal. The I-beam, the main I-beam in my house looked like somebody had wrung it out like a dish rag. My neighbor's I-beam had melted over his 2 motorcycles. So that's how intense the heat was. My son-in-law said he would, because my driveway looked like it had been jackhammered. So my son-in-law said he estimated the temperature had to be between 2,500 and 3,000 degrees.
We talked to the firemen who happened to be there when our house caught fire. We got caught in the firestorm. We had a steel roof and a brick house, and it ran into our steel garage doors and blew through our house. So he told us there was nothing could be done to save our house. He saved the house next door.
Tell him how long it was.
Yeah, he said that the time he saw the fire hit our house, about 30 seconds to cross across our house. And he said it was about 8 minutes to take our house down.
The steel I-beams had melted and one end was up on the basement wall where it sits, and then it had softened to the point that it just melted down and was lying on the floor. It was.
So all four sides around our house were burned, and ours just sat there.
One day I didn't tell anybody, and my daughter and I didn't even tell her where she was going, and I started driving up there, and she was just hysterical, saying, you know, what are you doing? And I said, we're going up and we're going to go see the house. And when I drove up Flying W Ranch Road, and I saw, first of all, Parkside, which is on the right-hand side, that was just completely devastated. I mean, almost every house in there was cleared out. I mean, I just covered my mouth with my hand and was just, I mean, sobbing. It was just, because I couldn't even believe it. I didn't even think that it would look that bad. I don't know what I thought, but I couldn't believe what I saw.
You know, there's a lot of shock and disconnect, you know. I mean, you can't fully realize something like that, especially a third of the way around the globe here. But you know, it was devastating. I mean, kind of speechless. I mean, you're feeling it in your heart.
I was looking at the houses where we were doing evacuations, the voluntary evacuations on Sunday, and it was stunning to me how all of the houses in that area just seemed to be gone. I mean, they were just leveled. Everything's just down to rubble.
I'm born and raised here, so obviously the Flying W Ranch was part of my growing up. Every time family members would visit, that's where you took them. You took them to the truck wagon dinner. And so when I got onto that property and saw the devastation, it's the first time I really kind of got emotional about what was happening because of the destruction. There wasn't going to be much that could be salvaged. And so that was, I think, the first time that I realized that this was going to be forever changed.
The whole hillside was black. All the trees were black in our yard. Everything was just, and then we come around the corner and there's no house. The house that you would always see when you came around the corner, it was just weirdly blank there.
There was no rhyme or reason to any of it. And to this day, I still look at that and wonder why that house burned and this one didn't.
It was really hard to go back in. And I didn't go back in for months and months. And it really wasn't until my son went back to do mitigation work. He's at Doherty High School and they have some volunteer programs and things. And he went in there to help out. And then I went back in. And it was pretty humbling.
Seeing a lot of the places where we were and still seeing the houses there that we had done some of the protection on, it felt really good. And it was like, oh, they did stop.
Buddy, my best dog ever, Buddy Boy. He's buried, you're not supposed to bury your dog in your backyard, but he's buried in my backyard up kind of in the corner. And the fence, everything was totally burned except for I put this huge boulder right over his grave. And it had like our landscaping even was all like gorilla hair way back up in the corner. So all that burned, nothing but dirt and one boulder right where he's buried. So when they were leveling the lot and doing the foundation, I was like, you can, make it look like clean slate, everything except for that one little corner of the yard. You can't disrupt Buddy Boy's grave, so he's still there.
We asked, can we kind of look around and go through stuff? We had gloves and they didn't want us to, but we did anyway. And you find stuff, but it's burned up.
A home has a life, and it's really, it's a sacred site when it burns down, and it's almost like a burial site, and you really don't want other neighbors even doing it lovingly, picking through until you've had a chance to go through there. And so finally I felt, let's have Tim go through and see what he can find.
Digging through there, you find little things and lots of, celebrations when we'd find cups, Limoges cups from Chris's grandmother and things like that. And of course they're not usable, they're damaged, even if they're intact, there's
you know, I don't know what, sand grains and ash and molten glass on the outside of all this ceramic or pottery.
It was really reminding me of an archaeological site because, you know, you're looking at things that were on the top floor mixed in with things on the middle floor and mixed in with things in the basement. And, but it's just, the first time there, we just, it was hard. We needed to be alone and we weren't alone. There were some people coming along and I just, I needed to go. And you know, I couldn't stay very long.
The Samaritan's Purse organization was doing that for homeowners, was helping them dig through the ashes. And my wife contacted them and they came out one morning, you know, 25 or 30 strangers showed up and with a crew leader, and their process was very disciplined. They had a few people that get in the foundation and dig through ash. They fill up 5-gallon plastic paint buckets, pass those up to then people who have wheelbarrows and sifters, and they pour the ashes in there and they sift through, and if they find anything, they set it aside.
Because we had a steel roof, you couldn't go in there because the roof was jagged and metally, so you couldn't walk onto the property.
The one good thing that came out of it was my daughter had made a clay pot and it was gorgeous, and I just happened to be digging in that spot and I saw this like rounded shape. So I dug with my hands and I couldn't believe it. It was full and whole. The pot was not broken, damaged. The only thing was it was slightly discolored, and so she has that now. She's just thrilled.
We had gone to the Titanic show
in Denver, the exhibit.
And you know, on the way out, bought a little coffee mug and found it, but it looks like the original thing.
Yeah, that Titanic mug made it.
And we found a DVD. What was that?
Backdraft.
Backdraft.
How ironic is that?
It was the only one that was in good condition, but you opened it up and it was all melted.
But that cover was fine.
Pristine, yeah.
That's the strangest things. I mean, and nothing that was savable that you could still put into a new home and have it look new. Obviously, everything was broken or cracked, and there was one Polaroid picture of all things, a Polaroid picture of my daughter's first day in kindergarten. A Polaroid picture made it through that, and that's about it.
I found my button box. The box itself was intact because it was metal. All the paint was burned off, and I opened it very carefully, and here were all the buttons until I touched them. And then just poof, nothing but fine, fine ash.
I had a big toolbox in the garage, and it was just a big lump of metal on the garage floor. And there was hardly anything that was recognizable. We found one lamp. There was a raku, I think you call it, lamp, that I didn't know what it was at first. When we were down in the basement looking, we're like, what is this piece of pottery? And all the metal and everything melted off of it, but the pottery part survived.
I actually found my college sorority pin. It was burned. That thing's about that big, but I found it. You know, once you know where things fell, then you could start looking for stuff. But I found my grandmother's cast iron skillets. They were burnt. Believe me, they were very clean.
I remember this lady was just standing, which was all that was left was her foundation. And we walked up and we were going to hand her some water. And I said, I'm so sorry. And she says, are you kidding me? And she hugs me and she's just crying and she says, thank you for everything you did. And I was so overwhelmed because I'm like, oh my gosh, you've lost everything. And I said that to her. I said, I don't know how you can thank us. I said, I feel horrible that your home is gone. And she goes, I have what's most important to me. And she pointed to her daughter and she goes, and I'm so glad that none of you got hurt doing what you did. And so I was just taken aback by that. And so we go down in the next street and we see in this foundation there was actually a safe. And this elderly couple, and they were just kind of looking down at the basement at the safe. And so we asked, could we help? And she said, do you think there's anything left in this safe? And I said, well, let's go look. And so we pulled some tools off the engine and we pry open this floor safe. And all the papers and some of the things were kind of burnt at the top. And in the bottom was her grandmother's wedding rings. And she just, again, just took our pictures and hugged us. And it just was so rewarding to just that one little piece that was salvageable.
There were a couple of ceramic pieces that were my stepdaughter's from when she was little, that the firemen had found somewhere and had put them on the foundation.
When my daughter and I had gone up, I had a grand piano, and I saw the cast iron plate that's in the back of the piano. It was laying there. The piano was gone, but that didn't burn. And I decided that I wanted to make an art piece out of that right then and there. I said to her, you know, maybe I can hang this on the wall someday. But it was really, really heavy, so when I went back to get it, it was gone. Someone had stolen it.
I found this glob of melted glass. It's about that big. And in that fused glass were pieces of all the bracelets, you know, just the beads and little chunks of gold and things like that. I said, I've got to save this. This will be my fire art.
We found some photographs that were unaffected. Not many, but a few. My aunt had made a ceramic Christmas village, and it was, I don't know, 6 or 7 houses. There was a general store, there was a couple of houses, there was a church, a railroad station, and we found the whole set.
My next door neighbor has a fire safe that's rated at, it's supposed to be rated at like 2,000 degrees, and it looked like a refrigerator that was bowed out, and everything was cooked inside of it. The knobs were all burned off. They actually had to get a locksmith to come over and break into it, but when they opened it up, there was nothing but ashes from guns in there.
I had a lot of books, and I saw one shelf of books, and it looked intact, but it was lily white, absolutely snow white. You could actually read the titles on the spines, and then when you touched it like that, it went poof, was gone. And then down below that, there were books that had fallen open. Same thing, burned, but you could still read the text. As soon as you touched it, just poof.
I wasn't ready to be finished. We have family members who helped us do the sifting, and after once or twice they were pretty convinced that we weren't going to find anything more. But I wasn't quite ready to finish that process yet. And you really do need to be done looking for what you feel is important before you go forward, because you don't want to look back 10 years from now and think, what if I missed something? What if something was in there that now has been hauled away?
I'll tell you the hardest thing was on the 3rd day when they cleaned up our lot, and you look down and everything you own is just one big pile of sand, dust, dirt. That's all it is. The steel was gone, everything else was gone. It's just this huge mound of
ash. That's what it was.
Yeah.
We went through a period of time where we felt really guilty because we should have stopped that thing.
We were so devastated by the loss. I mean, I know that we made a difference in a lot of areas. And I know I've reconciled that they're just, given the resources that we had and the weather, that we weren't going to be able to do anything different. And yet we felt like we lost.
You talk to any one of our crews and man, we hate to lose one house, you know. And in that, you know, that moment we lose almost 350 houses, including the 2 people that died, you know. That's hard.
You'd be hard pressed to find a firefighter in the city of Colorado Springs that needs a pat on the back, but it's nice to see sometimes that people appreciate what you do for them.
We would round the corner onto Garden of the Gods, and the streets are lined with people with thank you signs, screaming. It was like a parade. You know, that's what it felt like, you know, and that was really wonderful.
It's really neat. I know I can't say thanks enough to all those people. We got so much water and so much food, and even long time afterwards, people were still bringing stuff by the fire stations to say thanks, and so much of it during the fire that there was no reason why any of our firefighters or any of the outside agencies that were helping us went without food, water, or clothing. I think the coolest thing ever was somebody brought, and from donations from some of the stores in the area, the retail stores, somebody brought tons of socks to the staging area, and you would think it was solid gold, because heck with the hamburgers and stuff, where's those socks? Everyone was asking for socks. And it was nice because everybody's feet were just sopping wet.
I'll never be able to thank the public enough for the small things like eye drops and saline solution for because of your eyes and your nose and everything was just covered and filled. And so finally when you were able to get down to staging, socks. Somebody brought in socks and I remember grabbing 2 pairs of socks because I had such horrible blisters.
We all know the firemen save people, and unfortunately we have to do things at times that don't make people happy, like writing tickets, like arresting someone. It was good for people to realize that we also get involved in this sort of an operation, and we're all about just making sure everyone's okay.
Even in the places that were burned, there was, thank you signs for the efforts that were done, and that meant a lot to the crews as well.
One of the things that I have seen in Colorado, and then never before seen on the level that I saw here, was just the community support. And that was a common theme with the incident management team and all the firefighters coming from around the country to help with this fire. They have never experienced the community spirit and the show of support that they experienced here. It was overwhelming to a lot of the firefighters.
We, like others, put a simple sign together, put it in the yard, and then day after day, that just sort of exponentially grew the number of signs and the different ways people were trying to express their thanks. Homemade signs, some people that had deeper pockets buying signs or having them made and that kind of thing. And we just fell in love with the idea and the response and thought somebody needs to document it. It was really one day to the next we would notice a sign blow away or would be partially damaged or would fade, and we thought somebody's got to do something. So my kids and I went out for hours on probably 5, 6, 7 different days and took as many pictures as we could. We actually used Walgreens.com. You drag and drop pictures into a scrapbook, had it made and had it overnighted to us, and we got it, and it was really a cool prototype. And from there I thought, I think this could be something more. I think somebody, some people in the community really could use it to heal, and we could use it to capture the spirit of how we all feel toward those heroes.
People were so supportive. They were bringing messages of hope and praise to our people at their fire stations. They were bringing food, baked goods. They were bringing signs to thank them. There were people lining the streets, and it was incredibly humbling to see that amount of support from our citizens, even though we feel like we let our community down based on what happened during this fire.
It's nice to see that when a community is affected as profoundly as this one has been, that people can come together and recognize that there's more good in the world than there is evil, and that's always nice to see.
So I walked over to the area, and there were these 2 little girls. They were loading water into the ice. And I'll never forget, because it was so cute. I reached down to get one of the bottles of water, and the little girl looked up at me, and she looked at her daddy, and she said, "Daddy, you mean they have girl firefighters?" I'll never forget it. And then she looked at me, and he goes, "She wants to give you a hug." I said, "Okay."
It's different when it's your town. And it was very, very difficult and very emotional for us. Our fire department today, as an organization and as individuals, is very different than it was, say, June 22nd before the fire began until now after. We're a different organization, and we're different human beings because of this experience.
I think we decided that day when we went back up there and saw the burned down house and met with our neighbors. All our neighbors, it was the same question, like, you gonna rebuild or not rebuild? As soon as we saw each other, we were all like, it's a great neighborhood. I can't, see moving anywhere else. I think we're gonna rebuild. So we kind of made the decision that day that we're gonna rebuild, come back.
Where are we comfortable? Where is home to us? And for us, home is 2270 Yankton Place, that we can't fathom living somewhere else. It just wouldn't feel right. So it was a somewhat simple decision to make to go home.
Approving the contractor who's going to clean it all up and get it ready to be rebuilt, and that's real important. I think we're going to feel so much more positive once we've got the foundation and all the debris out and all the dead trees, and have a blank slate that's not just destruction, you know. So yeah, things will look up.
It's a process. Once you learn, you lose everything. It's a process. We'd run into people. It's funny, you can recognize the people who also lost their house. You'd see them at Dillard's wandering around trying to find something to wear.
We thought about moving back there, or rebuilding on the same place, but there were emotional reasons and objective reasons, and the emotional reasons were, do we really want to go back to that same place? And then we felt we'd always be comparing what we had to what we, you know. And my stepdaughter was terrified. She didn't even want to come back from Denver back to Colorado Springs. She wanted no part of going back to Huffman Court.
We had picked Colorado Springs to retire. And we had picked that house. We had renovated it. We had a new kitchen. We had new decks. We had all new windows. We were going to start on the bathrooms. That was our last big project on July 1st. I mean, we were on a march to finish this house, and it's what we wanted, and now we start over.
8 of the households that were on Yankton Place are planning on rebuilding and moving back. A few of them, this was very traumatic for, and it's just easier to move somewhere, to some other neighborhood.
Rebuilding was not even an option. I mean, when we went up there and we saw the hillside, there was no way. I mean, number one, it was horrible looking, and it would never come back in our lifetime like it was. And number two, it was just a constant reminder of the fire, so we just, we knew right then and there we weren't gonna build again.
We kind of went with a builder that's been building for a long time, and he already had the crews all in place. And since we were the first one that came to him for Waldo Canyon, he was like, I'm going to throw everything at it. We're going to have you a house as quick as we can, and you just pick what you want and we'll build it.
The floor plan is, in sweeping strokes, quite similar to the home that we lost, so it was very appealing to us. It's just much more modernized, which is, again, also nice.
I actually have been able to get my house plans from Regional Building. Unfortunately, they were unreadable, but my builder knew the original architect. So she has redone the plans. Of course, the outside will look the same. Minor changes on the inside.
It's totally different. It was a 3-level house. Now it's a ranch with a basement. Totally different footprint. I don't know if Marie wanted it to be different, but she just kind of decided, like, I don't want the exact same thing, otherwise it might be a reminder. And I mean, you're always reminded once you go back, but it's just something brand new. It definitely, I think it was the right choice now that we're moved back in.
I'm glad that we didn't make a decision, in a month that say, we're going to rebuild, we're going, because that was what we were doing. And then we just stepped back, and some of the stress went down, and said, we got to rethink this and ask ourselves, is this the right time to make a change? Is it the right thing to do for us at this point in our life?
I was just up there yesterday and got to see some of the homes that are being rebuilt, and such tenacity to make it okay that this is their community, and the families were getting together all year long, having barbecues, and you think, my gosh, that's the human spirit.
I think it'll look good once everybody gets landscaped again. That's the weirdest part. It's about living there right now. Is like you look out the window and you're like, wow, nothing looks the same right around our house anymore, other than sitting in the same physical spot. It's like a clean slate. I mean, you drive up to the house and you're like, I'm driving up to my house, but everything's different.
For the first month or so, it was really depressing. It was hard to look at that. It was hard to believe I was there while that was going on. And now when you go up there, it's pretty neat to see how everything's coming back up. Homes are being rebuilt. It just feels like, somewhat of a triumph.
Those who have enough vision for the neighborhood will be back. And I think developers will look at the missing areas and rebuild there. But out of this whole thing, the whole neighborhood just became like a family.
I love my house. I love my neighborhood. I love Mountain Shadows. I'm ready to go back. It's my home. And I can't imagine living anyplace else in the city. It will come back. I have no doubt.